Hey guys, this is Mr. Yo, and today what we're going to talk about is mixed nomenclature. So before we move on, always remember when we talk about nomenclature, that basically means naming. So we already went over a couple naming stuff, which we will review today, and following with some new materials as well. So here is the table of contents. Today we're going to talk about ionic compounds. Okay, ionic compounds with transition metal. So those two things we already went over it probably 2 units ago and also the previous unit. And then next we're going to talk about covalent compound, which is actually the new materials that we're going to learn more in depth. And then you guys have the homework assignments that you guys have picked up in class. So make sure to work on them after going over this video. So when we're solving some practice problems within these slides, make sure to pause the video before looking at the answer key. So here we go. Before everything else, these are all the charges that you need to remember. Okay? So if you guys still don't remember this, please make sure to memorize and read it over and over until you recognize all these charges. Okay? So ionic compounds. First thing first, in an ionic compound, ionic represents two things. Combination of metal plus a nonmetal, just like mentioned right here. So whenever we talked about metals and nonmetals, the things that need to pop up in your head is that metals are positive charge, while nonmetals are negative charge, which means it does contain ions. Now, if you guys are still confused how to drop and swap, make sure to practice more on the previous assignments that I've given you on the previous units. And if you have any other questions, make sure to send me an email or see me during class. And last but not least, we have the IDE ending. Always, always, always make sure that all ionic compounds ends with the IDE ending. So, if you look at the periodic table for this example, we have KCl. First thing first, we know K is going to be potassium. If we look at Cl, Cl would actually be a chlorine, but remember we need the IDE ending at the end, so it becomes chloride. Okay? So now that we know how to convert from chemical expression to a word naming, let's go over the opposite of it, which is from word to chemical formula. First thing first, we know barium is going to be Ba. But since this is in the second column, second column, it's going to have a positive 2 charge. But if we move on to chloride, Cl is in group 17, so it should have a negative 1 charge. Now next, last thing you need to do is drop and swap. So ignore the charges and just drop and swap the numbers only. So it becomes BaCl2. So this should be pretty simple for you guys to understand because it's something we reviewed a lot of times together. So make sure to remember all those things before we move on to the next part. Next, let's talk about the ionic compound with transition metals. So how do we name those kind of compounds? Well, it's the same concept as the ionic compounds. It has the metal, which is a positive charge, nonmetal with a negative charge. Make sure to drop and swap and have the IDE ending at the end. Okay? So for transition metal, the only thing that is um, more special about is because it has a Roman numeral. Now, this Roman numeral represents the charge of the metal, the transition metal that you guys have within the problem. So if you guys don't remember the Roman numerals, I posted it on the right for you guys to check it out. So, like I mentioned, we have a Roman numeral 4, and that represents our charges. So in this case, we have Sn for tin and F for fluoride. And then we have the 1 negative charge there. So now we need to drop and swap, just like what we have. So 1 goes over here, 4 goes into F, and we get SnF4. Okay? So make sure to go back to the previous slides if you guys are stuck and confused about these materials. If not, let's go on to the next part. So now this is about the covalent naming. So there are a lot of information that we need to cover, but the most important thing about covalent compound is that in covalent, we have 2 nonmetals. Okay? And if we talk about nonmetals, there are going to be an IDE ending, but no ions. So I meant to cross out ions, but there's no ions. Okay? So there's no ions, which means there's no positive or negative charges. Now, something that I should emphasize is that if there are 2 nonmetals, which one will actually go first? So if you guys remember from back in our previous unit when we talked about periodic trends, we're going to focus on the electronegativity. Electronegativity increases as you go from left to right and bottom to top. So this is electronegativity. So anything that has the least, the smaller electronegativity will always go first. So if we look at N and O, N is in group 15 and O is in group 16. So if we look at the electronegativity, we know that nitrogen will be a 15, which is smaller than oxygen. So therefore, we will have nitrogen first, not oxygen first, but nitrogen first. And last but not least, the unique part about covalent compound is that there is going to be a prefix that you will have to go over. Now, some of these prefixes should be familiar to you because of geometry. For example, pentagon or penta means 5. Hexagon, which has 6 sides, has 6. And then we have octagon, nonagon, and decagon, which is pretty much 8, 9, and 10. You do have to memorize this for the test, but on the quiz, I'll let you guys kind of have a cheat sheet or something that you can use to help you guys out with the prefixes. So make sure to know these prefixes for the covalent compounds. Now, there are some rules that you need to remember. Okay, the rules are pretty simple, but if you get confused with it, please make sure to come and ask me some questions. For example, number 1 says don't put mono on the first element. Basically saying is, for example, if we have P, but there's only one of them. Okay, so let's say instead of P2, let's say P1. That means it's just going to be phosphorus. Not monophosphorus, but just phosphorus. Okay. Next, it says drop the second O in the mono prior to oxygen. So if we have mono following with an oxide, we have two O's. So in this case, what we're going to do is instead of having two O's, we're just going to have one humongous O. So it becomes monoxide. So it all depends on how you pronounce this to make this work out. Now, number 3, it says drop the A in the prefix ending of A prior to oxygen. So as you can see in the example, instead of saying tetraoxide, you're going to replace the A and put an O there. So it becomes tetroxide. So make sure to review these rules, the informations, so that you can answer these questions perfectly. So now let's go on to the question, P2O5. Well, first of all, what is P2? We need to first figure out that what is 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to go on to the prefix informations. It says 2 is di. So I'm going to make sure that I have the word di on it. Okay. Following with the word for the element P, which is phosphorus. Not phosphide, but phosphorus. Okay, I might have spelled this wrong, but so it's always phosphorus. Okay, so make sure that you know this before moving to the next step. So as you can see, it's diphosphorus. Next, if we have O5, well, we know 5 is going to be penta, so I'm going to make sure I have penta in it, following with oxygen. But remember, the second element or the end of the element must have the IDE ending. So I'm going to take out the GEN, and actually with the Y as well, and put IDE. Okay, so you get pentaoxide. Now, our rule mentions that we cannot have an A and an O together in this case. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we take out the A and replace it with an O. Therefore, our name in this case is diphosphorus pentaoxide. Okay? And that's pretty much it for covalent naming. So if you guys have any questions, make sure to send me an email or ask me during class so that I can help you guys out. Okay? Now let's solve some problems so that I know that you guys know how to solve these problems. So pause the video before you move on and answer each of these questions on your own. Make sure that you understand them before moving on to the homework section as well. Okay, so now let's go over this. So first thing first, we have NCl3. We know there's N, but there's only one of them. So remember, we don't put mono for the first element, so we're going to put nitrogen. Okay. If we have nitrogen, the next thing we have is Cl3. Now, 3 we know it's tri, because if you think about triangle has 3 sides, which means tri will also have 3 parts. Now, Cl is chlorine, but since we have the IDE ending, it becomes nitrogen trichloride, just like the answer written on here. Now let's go over the rest. So Ni3 is nitrogen trioxide. Now I did not mention anything about having an I, so it's totally fine if you guys have 2 I's on there. That is fine. Okay? So nitrogen triiodide would be perfect. Following with the next one, we have sulfur trioxide. So the I and the O in this case will not do any much changes here because it's not an A or an O. Okay? So if it's not an A and O, we will just keep the I or keep whatever letter is written on there with the O. Next, we have dinitrogen tetrahydride. Now, we haven't actually talked about hydride much or deal with it. Hydrogen is actually a gas, which means it also means it's non-metal. So it's totally fine if you get into that part. And hydrogen can also be a negative charge as well. It's a positive one or a negative one charge. In this case, I would say, well, since hydrogen is well, hydrogen has needs the IDE endings. It's in the end part. And I will actually talk more about this during class, but just remember, if H is at the end, always remember to put the IDE ending. Don't get it mixed up with hydroxide, okay? Because hydroxide is OH minus. So whenever we're dealing with covalent compounds, we will not deal with any of the polyatomic ion. That will not be the case in covalent compounds. Okay. Last but not least, we have carbon tetrachloride. So if you get any of these correct, then you are pretty much good to go to move on. If you get stuck or if you had any questions or if you don't have any of these problems right, then please, please, please come and check with me on these stuff. All right. So now there are things that you need to do. I want you guys to finish the 2 worksheets that you guys have picked up. Okay, I know there are 3. One of them is an outline, so you don't have to care much about it, but it's for preparation for your next unit test. Secondly, you are going to have a mixed naming quiz next class, so make sure to go over these notes before next class. And the quiz is going to be on Schoology. It's going to be 5 multiple choice questions. So make sure to go over your notes. If you have any questions, please send me an email or see me during class, and I'll try to help you as much as possible. So good luck with your study, and I'll talk to you later.